This video is going to show you how to make an Easter slab cake, which there will be some different ways of doing it. So I'll just show you this way, but you may vary it a bit depending if you're making this at home, what size tins you've got. Now the first thing I've done is weigh out my ingredients. So I've got 2 eggs, 100 grams of caster sugar, 100 grams of self-raising flour, and 100 grams of margarine. Now if you're not very confident cracking your eggs, it's always a good idea to pop those in first, because we're just going to do the all-in-one method here. So by putting your eggs in first, you can clearly see if you have got any shell in there. And then we can add the other ingredients. So I'm going to pop the flour in, the margarine, and the sugar. And then with the wooden spoon, we're just going to mix all of those ingredients together. Now we want them to come together so that they are it's like a batter. Okay, we don't want it very, very stiff. We want it so that it's like a batter. So you just use your wooden spoon. Sometimes if you need to, use the back of your wooden spoon to actually try and soften the margarine further. It's generally a good idea, mind you, could leave your margarine out of the fridge for about 10 minutes, which will just help soften it up. And then, as I said, you can see now that that's starting to come together, but it's still at the moment got quite a few bits of margarine in there, so we just need to keep mixing that until it becomes a batter. So your mixture should, as I said, look like a nice smooth batter without any lumps in it. And at that point it's going to be ready. If it is a bit stiff, you may want to add a tablespoon of water to it or a tablespoon of milk to it. But hopefully, just from your measuring, it will turn out like that. Now at this stage, before you do anything else with it, if you wanted to, you could add some cocoa powder to it, you could add some food colouring, you could add some fruit to actually make it obviously a chocolate sponge or a fruit sponge. But I'm just going to keep this as it is because there will be chocolate going on there when I decorate it. So we're going to pour that into a prepared tin, so you can hopefully see when I move the bowl that I've actually lined the tin with some greaseproof paper, which is going to make it easier to get out. And then using my spatula, I will use the spatula to scrape out all of the mixture from the bowl, so we're not wasting any of that mixture. Once you've got it in the tin, try and get the top nice and even, nice and flat. It will, however, even out when it starts to cook in the oven. But if you can just get it even as well to start with, that should help then to ensure we have an even rise on the sponge. So that's going to go into the oven now. Gas mark 5 at 190 degrees Celsius. Hopefully it's going to be done in about 20 minutes. This is generally because I would usually use this mixture over 2 tins. I've got quite a small square tin here, so I'm going to cook it on a slightly lower temperature for possibly a longer period of time. If you've got shallow tins, so again, as I said, if you were making this in school, it may be a thinner base and a thinner sponge, and it wouldn't take quite so long to cook. Once you've done your dishes, you can start to make your butter icing ready for when your cakes come out of the oven. So the first thing that we're going to do this time is start to soften up that margarine so that it makes it easier to add the icing sugar to. If you put it all in at once, it is actually really hard to get it to mix together. So like I'm doing here, just squash it against the side of your mixing bowl. Just do it in one area. If you do it all the way around the bowl, your margarine gets spread too thinly. So just keep in one area and squash your margarine against the side of the bowl so that it gets it nice and soft. Then you can start adding your icing sugar a little bit at a time. So make sure that you've weighed it out first. You can have that in a separate bowl, and then bit at a time, okay, maybe 2 spoonfuls at a time. Mix it in. Okay, it does take a little while, but it is worth it to make sure that you've got a nice smooth butter icing. So just mixing in the icing sugar into the margarine. And once that has all been mixed in, you can add some more icing sugar and then just keep going until you've put all of it in. You may as well decide that you want to put some cocoa powder in here. You may want to put in some vanilla essence, some lemon juice or orange juice. It would only take a very small amount of the juices. Cocoa powder, depending really on how dark you want it, I would say myself probably a couple of teaspoons would be ample. So at this stage we're ready to add some more icing sugar, and then we just keep doing that process until we've added all of the icing sugar to the margarine. So I've mixed this now until that as well is nice and smooth, and with mine what I'm going to do is add some food colouring to it. So I'm going to pop some yellow food colouring in, because I am doing this as an Easter cake, and I do always associate yellow with Easter, but you can do any colour that you want to do, or as I said, you can use your cocoa powder. You could use some juice and some food colouring. There's no reason why you can't put both of those in there. There is no point though, some pupils ask me about putting food colouring in if they've put cocoa powder in. You won't actually see the colour then, because obviously you've made it chocolate and you won't see any of the colours through the brown colouring. So if you want a colour, don't put your cocoa powder in. So that's all mixed up now, so I'm just going to wait for my cake to cook, and then I will show you how to finish that off. When our sponge cake is nice and springy and it doesn't feel like our fingers are sinking into it, we can take it out to the oven, and then we need to leave that to cool down. Now while that's cooling down, we can get our icing into our piping bag ready. Now the easiest way I found to do this is to get yourself a plastic beaker. We've got lots of plastic beakers available. Pop your icing bag into there. If you are using a nozzle, the nozzle would actually go in there now. Okay, again, some people seem to think that it fits on the outside of the bag. It doesn't. If you put it on the outside of the bag, it's going to fall off at some point. So if I was using a nozzle, I would put the nozzle in there now as well, and then we can start spooning in the butter icing. Now again, I would change from my wooden spoon to use a tablespoon to do this process, and just scoop it in. Now I'm not going to put all of it in, because I'm going to put some in the middle of the cake and some on the spread on the top of the cake as well. But just make sure that I've got a good amount of my yellow butter icing in there, and then I can lift the top up and then just start to squeeze gently the butter icing down into the bottom of the piping bag, ready to use. Now the one thing that you need to do is to make sure that that sponge is extremely cool before you start putting anything on there, because in your butter icing, obviously we've made it with margarine, so if the sponge is too hot and we put that on there, then it's going to melt. Okay, so we just need to put that, as I said, to one side and make sure our sponge cools down enough. Now something else I've decided that I'm going to use on my cake, I'm going to put a chocolate nest on there, which I've made out of some Rice Krispie cakes, and I want therefore to have something that gives a grass effect. So what I've done into the plastic bag here, I've put some green food colour in and some coconut, desiccated coconut, and I've just mixed that together, and it gives us this lovely green colour coconut. And again, obviously you could do that with any colour if you fancy just having some coconut on there in a different colour. So what I've done here is I've cut my cake into 2 pieces, which is why I've called it an Easter slab, and the one piece will go on top of the other one. So I just need to make sure that totally cools down, as I said to you. Something else I've prepared in advance is just a little Easter nest to actually, hopefully, if I've done it narrow enough, to go on the top. So I've just done some chocolate and Rice Krispies, made them into what I hope looks like a nest, and then put some, I've just got some little meringue covered in chocolate there, but you could obviously use mini eggs or Smarties in there. So it's just really waiting for that sponge to cool down. If you take a little bit of your butter icing, obviously once it's started to cool down immediately, it's not going to work. If you just spread some of your butter icing on there, you will see if it's okay to spread it or if you need to wait for a bit longer, because if it's not okay, then it will start melting into the sponge, which means if we were to put a huge amount on there, it would all start melting into the sponge. So I'm just going to keep an eye on that a second and see what happens. Okay, so far it seems to be pretty good. I can see though that it's melting a little bit there on the outside. So again, I'm just going to leave that a little bit longer to cool. So to finish this off then, I've put the one half of the cake onto a plate. Now that's because I'm working at home and I'm going to pop that straight into the fridge when I'm done. If you're doing this in school, you may want to bring in something that will fit into your container so that you can make it on there and then lift it into the container. Or you can actually make it on the lid of your container and then put the lid on, put the bottom on, so it actually becomes an upside down container, but that will keep your cake nice and flat. Now what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to just pipe my butter icing on, because what I find doing it this way, even though this is for the middle of the cake, is that from the outside then it gives you the impression that you've got a nice smooth butter icing in there. Now I'm not going to leave the middle empty. Okay, however, I am aware that that is going to be quite a lot of butter icing. So I'm just going to zigzag that there and then put on the top of my cake. So we can see there that it's now become sandwiched between the 2 pieces of cake. Now again, if you wanted to, you could put some Nutella on there, you could put some jam on there in the middle before you put the 2 sides together, but I'm just using buttercream on this one. So the next thing I'm doing on here now is spreading the top with some butter icing before I put my other bits on. So I'm just putting the butter icing on and spreading it. Then I'm just using a table knife initially because it's smaller and I feel like I've got a bit more control over that, but then I will flatten the whole thing out using a palette knife to just make sure that it gives it a nice smooth top. Not that we're going to see much of that mind by the time I put my nest on there. So I'm going to put my nest on. Now what I want is some green each side of the nest. So rather than just do that a bit haphazardly, I'm going to put a ring on there. It's just an ordinary pastry ring, and I'm going to put some of the coconut on the edge there. So we just get a semicircle shape coming off it. Then I'm going to lift that up and just do the same down this end. Okay, I'm just trying to keep this quite simple to show you what to do, but with taking a bit more time over it, I would have made sure that it was a bit more central than that. So I've got my grass on there now, my green coconut grass. I'm going to pop my Easter nest on there, so the nest that I've actually prepared. I've got some little chicks as well, which I'm going to pop onto the cake. And then finally, I'm going to use the piping that I've got left in the bag just to pipe some bits on the cake, just to finish it off a bit. Now, as I said, I didn't put a nozzle in here, but you could put a star nozzle in here if you wanted to. You could, okay, I'll do my cake differently here, so you can see another way of doing it. So obviously using a nozzle would give you more of a flower design on there, or you could just cut the end off your piping bag and then just pipe a line down to actually finish it off like that. Okay, actually I'll take that bit off again and show you with a nozzle, just in case you're not sure the best way to use a piping bag. Okay, so I've just tidied that up a bit and got a new piping bag. So as I said to you, the nozzle actually goes inside the piping bag so that it doesn't fall out, and then we put the butter icing in. You need to then twist the top of the bag around, because what we don't want is the butter icing going back up this way, because we actually want it to come out through the nozzle. Now, if you haven't used a piping bag before, I would suggest that you just have a go on the work surface or on your whatever you're taking it home on. So you just, now you hold it with, if you're right-handed, you hold the top with the right hand. If you're left-handed, it's the other way round. And then you just use the bottom hand to hold the nozzle in place. You're going to do all the pushing with this top hand. So you just push down on the icing and bring the nozzle back up. Okay, so once you've had a go at that and you're happy with that, you can just decorate however you wish to on the side, on the top, sorry, of your cake. Okay, now if you've got some icing left in there, it doesn't matter if it's not symmetrical, so you can actually put some icing blobs wherever you want to. These are your cakes, so you can choose to decorate them however you wish. If you've got a large amount of butter icing left, you may decide that you want to pipe some around the bottom of your cake as well, and then people can have some of that with the cake when it gets cut. So that is how to make quite a quick Easter cake there. Okay, that's lovely and thick, which I don't know if I'm going to be able to. So lovely and thick with the butter icing on, but as I said, it could quite easily have Nutella, butter icing and jam, or just butter icing, whatever you prefer. So have a go at doing a cake, and please, if you can and you remember, post some pictures to me so I can see what you've managed to do as your Easter slabs.